lovely friends, it's Margaret, and it is time to talk about what I read in July. I know I say I had a good reading month every time I open a video, but I honestly genuinely feel like I do have a good reading month every single month that I read, because I am reading. So in July, I found a couple of new favorites and a new contender for worst book of the year, possibly. I'm not sure, we haven't decided on that yet. And I read a pretty good amount of books. I'm actually surprised by the number of books I read. I'm going to do stats a little bit differently this month because so many of my books were books I did not have physical copies of. Typically, I like to have physical copies of everything that I read, but you know, libraries closed and I had a whole bunch of e-arcs that I needed to get done so I could get my NetGalley percentage up and happier than it is at the moment. Long story short, we're trying something new and we'll probably be back to the old way next time because I like it better. In July, I read 13 books. The format breakdown for that was 6 audiobooks, 3 physical books, 2 ebooks, and 2 graphic novels. The age breakdown was 4 adult books, 1 new adult book, 7 YA, and 1 middle grade. Genre breaks down to 6 fantasy, 2 historical fiction, 1 contemporary, 1 nonfiction, 1 science fiction, and 1 classic. For ratings, I had 4... What is that number? For ratings, I read 4 5-star books, 6 4-star books, 2 3-star books, and 1 2-star book. 8 of those books were books that I owned, 3 of those books were e-arcs that I got off of NetGalley, and 2 of those books were books I got from my library, saving me a total of $33.98. My favorite book of the month was Of Curses and Kisses by Sandhya Menon, and my least favorite book of the month was The Warrior Maiden by Melanie Dickerson. Now that stats are out of the way, let's talk about the books that I read in July. Get ready, guys. So the first book that I finished in July was Aurora Rising by Amy Kaufman and Jay Kristoff. Aurora Rising is a YA science fiction about a ragtag team straight out of Space Academy who end up biting off a little more than they can chew on their first mission. This was a gift from Brianna at Coffee, Books, and Bullet Journals, and I'm pretty sure she gave it to me because she wants me to suffer. Let's just say that I've heard things about the ending of the second book. I will not be going directly to the second book. I'm gonna wait for the third book to come out. However, this was a really, really good science fiction. There is a mystery involved. There's a whole bunch of stuff that, like, you're kind of piecing things together as they happen. If you're used to science fiction and kind of this kind of stuff and how Amy Kaufman and Jay Kristoff write, you're gonna figure it out pretty easy. But watching the characters figure it out is also entertaining. Watching them not figure it out is also entertaining and slightly frustrating. I was yelling at Tyler the entire book because he was being that dumb. I was just like, sir, do you not see what's happening? Where are your brain cells? What happened to them? I really liked the way they set up the history of humans in space and how we got out where we got. I liked that there were a lot of different puzzle pieces and that you have Aurora kind of having to put things together at the same time that you have Tyler not putting things together. I'm gonna probably go back to that multiple times because the amount of time that it took him to figure that out. This could have been a 5-star book, but like, where was the romance, guys? It took like this much of the book to get to the romance. And then when it did, like, you didn't really, I don't know what ship I'm shipping, guys. I don't know. I have no idea because I'm not attached. I mean, some of them are cute, but I'm not attached to any of them. I'm just like, it's a romance. Also, the ending of this book hurt me on a deep personal level. It could have been a thing, and it wasn't the thing that I wanted it to be, which would have definitely made it a 5-star book, but it didn't. But it was good. I enjoyed it. I thought it was fun. I will be reading the next book. I'm just going to wait because I'm not doing that to myself. The next book that we need to talk about is Song of Blood and Stone by L. Penelope. Song of Blood and Stone is about Jasminda and Jack, 2 people who team up to prevent the fall of the mantle, the magical barrier that keeps their country safe from the greedy and violent Lagramari king. So this book came in and rescued my romance-deprived heart. It's like half romance and half like political turmoil, and I like that mix. I have found I really like books that have kind of political themes, especially themes that like have parallels to what we're dealing with in our society. I don't know why I'm over here when I've got all of this space over here. What's going on, guys? It's a little bit steampunk, like it was reminding me of a kind of Western style novel at the beginning, and then it got more maybe to like a World War I kind of era, but it is completely totally fantasy in this completely totally fantasy world. I really appreciated the different themes that were woven into this conflict between these two countries and what was going on with that. And then you have another element that was like, you find out about later, I don't want to spoil it, but like figuring that part out really made everything just go, wow, oh, I know what's happening now. I see all the pieces. I'm not sure that it could be counted as steampunk because I don't read a lot of it. And that's one of the things, like every time I read something that is slightly steampunky, I'm like, I need to read more steampunk. But it reminded me of some of these steampunk novels that I have read. I absolutely I love like when you have technology and it's in a place where it shouldn't be, and you see how it changes history. Although this wasn't historical, it just was like another world. But anyways, I will have trigger warnings for this book in the description box. If that is something that you need to check out, go down there, check them out. Next book that I finished in July was Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. Pride and Prejudice is a classic romance about Elizabeth Bennet as she tries to navigate love, unwanted proposals, and the antics of her slightly ridiculous family. This kicked off a whole like Pride and Prejudice need to watch all of the movies and sequels and stuff phase, and I'm still not out of it, but I've maybe slowed down a little bit. I'm not like binging Death Comes to Pemberley 3 nights in a row. So anyways, I love this story. It's so witty, and every time I read it, I find a new layer to this story. Like, this story was basically just being like, oh, Mr. Bennet is in fact the bad guy. That was he's not the greatest. He's entertaining, but not the greatest. I just love the depth that she gives to her characters. I love the way that she writes. It's not everyone's style, I understand, but I do like reading it because I feel like I'm smarter having read Jane Austen's style, because it is so witty and clever, and it does so much with like, it'll make you think about things without actually like telling you she's gonna make you think about things. She'll just slide stuff into what's happening that'll make you go, huh, I wonder. And that's basically my entire reading experience. I love the character arcs in this. I love the fact that you have two characters that sit back and look at their actions and go, I need to be better. And they do that without putting any pressure on the other person, if that makes sense. So they do it for their own benefit and for the benefit of those around them, and not to impress each other, and I like that. The next book I finished in July was The Court Dancer by Kyung-Suk Shin. The Court Dancer is an adult historical fiction that delves into the life of Yi Jin, a court dancer who catches the eye of a French diplomat. So this wasn't my favorite book that I have read this month, just because I had issues with the ending. Knowing me, you'll probably know what some of those issues are. It was a sad book, and I don't particularly like sad books. However, it was really, really well written. So if you like character-driven, like really introspective literary fiction that gets into the characters, like it went into Yi Jin's life. We start out with Yi Jin at one point, and then we backtrack and we get her entire life story through the course of this book. It was really well done in how it covered all of this and made it relevant to what was happening to Yi Jin herself as she went through her life. The ending made me sad. It did. I mean, I should have known going into it that it's historical fiction, so that's what's gonna happen, but it's still, yeah. The next book we need to talk about is The Silence of Bones by June Her. The Silence of Bones is a YA historical fiction about Seoul, a young woman endangered to the police department in 1800s Joseon, and it follows her as she gets drawn into the mysterious death of a young, noble woman. I was really drawn in by the mystery of this book, by what happened. Why are these people showing up dead? I was also really enthralled by the way that the history in this was playing against the history in The Court Dancer. They paired up very, very well, and I really enjoyed that. It is another book that was sad, but there was like a little bit of a hope towards the end, and it also didn't do the thing The Court Dancer does at the end, which is one of my cardinal sins of writing of books. If a writer does that, they're dead to me. I thought she did a really good job of balancing her world with her characters, with the history that the characters are moving through and living in. There was just enough explanation that you weren't constantly being taken out of the story to go like research things that had happened, but at the same time, it did not bog down the narrative. I do think there were a few flaws when it came to some of the things being not necessarily too convenient, but just not executed as well as they could have been in regards to the mystery. Now, I was surprised by who it was. She drew me in that much to the story of the main character that when I finally sat down and like it was revealed who was the murderer, you're sitting there going, I should have seen that coming, but I didn't. The next book we need to talk about is Clockwork Prince by Cassandra Clare. The Infernal Devices series is a YA fantasy about Tessa Gray, who moves to London to be with her brother, but when she gets there, her brother is nowhere to be found, and she ends up kidnapped by a pair of warlock sisters. So I am 2 whole books into my Shadowhunters reread that I was supposed to. I'm supposed to be like 7 or 8 books in by now. Whoops. Oh well. I still love this. I still feel the same way about it that I did the last time, which is that some of the things that happen in this book, I don't think would have happened in this book in the way that they happened if it had not been for certain plot points that were going on. I think that that kind of time crunch that the characters are under, or certain characters are under, it definitely led to some decisions being made that would not have been made, I feel, personally. Not that I'm mad about it, because it works out really well in the 3rd book for me as a shipper. I just love these characters. I think they are so much fun. I love Tessa. She is the bookish queen of my dreams. I love Will. He is fantastic. Jim is the sweetest. Like, I love them all. They're amazing. They make me so happy. I have fun with this series, and I cannot wait to read the next one and then read the one that comes after that. The next book we need to talk about is The Warrior Maiden by Melanie Dickerson. The Warrior Maiden is a YA historical fiction retelling the story of Mulan in a medieval European setting. I will not lie, this book did have its moments, it had its high points, it had places where I thought it might get a 3-star despite the cultural appropriation that's going on in this entire premise. However, in the end, I just could not overlook not only the cultural appropriation, but the way that she did the ending. Like, I'm not going to spoil it for you if you are interested in reading this book, but I just kind of was a little bit offended by that ending. I thought we had moved past that ending in fantasy. Or at least we could have a little duality in there. I really did like Mulan's character through a lot of the book. There were dumb decisions that were made. I don't understand why we still have this thing that, like, locking women up for their own good is a good thing, and that we need to protect. Okay, At the same time, if I were in the dude's position, I probably would have done the same thing for my significant other or potential significant other or whatever. But yeah, the real thing for me is just that she is taking a story that belongs to a culture that is not hers. And not only did she take it out of its context, but like she chose maybe one of the most problematic ways to get an Asian character into medieval Europe. It boggles my mind that that's what she chose when there were so many options available to her that she could have used and still had the main character connected to her heritage in some way. Like, just, yeah. And apparently this is not the only book where she does that. So I don't think I'm going to read any more Melanie Dickerson books. The next book we need to talk about is Of Curses and Kisses by Sandhya Menon. Of Curses and Kisses is a YA fantasy that retells the story of Beauty and the Beast in a modern boarding school setting. Sandhya Menon has hit it out of the park with me yet again. It is not, I won't say that it is as good as the Dimpleverse books. I didn't have this quite as intense a happy feeling finishing it. However, I still had that 5-star fuzzy feeling when I finished this. I loved it. I thought she did such a good job of working magic into her storyline in a way that has the reader going, okay, but is it magic or is it all in their heads? Am I imagining this? Are they imagining? Like, you are sitting there like just, you never quite decide whether, or at least I never quite decided whether it was real or not real. And I really appreciated that aspect where it was kind of left up for like, how do you feel about how things went down? It's left up to that. This is the first in a series. It's going to be 3 different fairy tale retellings, and I really liked how she took the elements of the original Beauty and the Beast story and then modernized them, made them kind of different. I really appreciated that. It wasn't shot for shot the exact same thing, but it was still, it had enough of the original that you're sitting there going, yeah, this definitely is a retelling. It's not just inspired by, like, this is actually something that is going into parts of the story that aren't necessarily in the Disney movie, which is fun. I loved Jaya and Gray as characters themselves individually, and then I loved how the relationship kind of started off a little bit testy. It's not necessarily enemies to lovers, although their families have been feuding for a very long time, but it does have, like, there's some tension there, there's some questioning. She kind of hates him at the beginning, and then she gets to know him, and then that gets harder, and she starts to question whether or not she's right about the things that she thinks she's right about. you can see how this worked for me. I'm not even mad that it's wrecking my Sandia Manon shelf, because now I have to figure out how to fit it in when everything fits perfectly. The next thing we need to talk about is Black Panther Avengers of the New World Volumes 1 and 2 by Ta-Nehisi Coates. Black Panther Avengers of a New World follows T'Challa as he tries to navigate the new system of government in Wakanda, and also the fact that portals are popping up around the country and spewing out monsters. So this is the 4th and 5th volume, respectively, of Ta-Nehisi Coates' Black Panther run? That's the word. Sorry, my brain just kind of there. I think I read volumes 1 through 3 last year, or earlier this year. It's really getting hard to tell time, and I really enjoyed the things that he explored in that first few volumes. I really like the team that T'Challa has put together for this series, especially since it includes Storm, who, as a child, was my favorite X-Men. She is the coolest of the X-Men, and I will take no argument on that fact. As much and as appealing as Logan is to me as a human being and someone who makes me laugh without really meaning to, Aurora's got it. I don't read nearly as much Marvel as I do DC, but Marvel always brings the banter and the antics, and even though Shuri is much older and maybe not quite as, I don't want to say fun, but there's definitely a different level and different energy to Shuri in the movies versus the comics. They still had some fun sibling antics, which I really appreciated and had a lot of fun reading. They're just like, they're at each other, and it's a little more mature in this because I think at least Shuri is older, but at the same time, they were fun, they were entertaining, they made me laugh. I also really liked the way that this has been, the way Coates has been looking at governing and at ruling people, and how do you make sure that most people have their voice heard, and what are the downfalls of that. I really appreciate how he goes into that. There are definitely parallels in what's happening in Black Panther to what is happening in some of the issues that we are finding in our own government today. The next book we're going to talk about is Resist and Persist by Aaron Wathan. Resist and Persist is adult nonfiction that discusses the role that feminism should have in the modern church. So I went into this thinking it was something completely different than I thought it was. I thought it was going to be more about social justice, specifically focused on race. I don't entirely remember why I got that impression when I looked at it as an art. The fact that it was written by a white woman, not that white people should not be writing about social justice and race issues, I go into those a little bit more skepticism sometimes because I know some of the things that they consistently leave out. However, I was pleasantly surprised to realize that this is about feminism in the church, and I just was here for it. I loved reading this book. I loved the things that it made me think about. It is not perfect by any means, but she touches on so many topics in this book in relation to feminism, specifically in relation to being inclusive and making sure that you are intersectional in your feminism and intersectional in your church as you're fighting for different people's rights. I loved the points that she brought up in this. I loved the examples that she gave. However, I would have liked a little bit more maybe citation, I guess. Like, she had some really good examples, but she also said some stuff that it's not the first time I have heard it, but she said some stuff that I would have liked to see, like, have her go back to the verses she's referencing and actually break them down and break down how the typical interpretation is incorrect to what the actual, like, context and everything of that interpretation of that part of scripture is. So I thought it was thought-provoking. I thought it was a great place to start, but I also think that there were some weaknesses in, like, if you're doing a book like this, you need to have a little bit more oomph to back up the points you were making. So while I agreed with some of these and I knew the things she was referencing, I would have liked a little bit more explanation for someone who is coming into this book as kind of a starter thing. The next book we need to talk about is Other Words for Home by Jasmine Warga. Other Words for Home is a middle grade contemporary about Judah who comes with her mother to the United States trying to escape the increasingly violent unrest in Syria. So I picked this up for Allie over at Mrs. Dunn Reed's currently reading book club. This is their August pick. I happened to have my library hold come in while I was doing the reading rush. I needed something to read, so I went for this. And it was so good. This is the first book in verse that I've read that has gotten 5 stars. I loved the way that she highlighted the emotions that Judah is feeling. I loved the way that she explored the fullness of Judah's personality and the fullness of her world. She is a very well fleshed out character. She is dealing with so many different issues in this book, and Jasmine Warga was able to go into all of those without getting too bogged down in them without them taking away from the story. Now, I think if this was like a YA or an adult novel, we definitely would have needed more context and more going into it. Because this is a verse book that is for middle graders, I think it's fantastic to introduce children to the lives of other kids that are not like their own. Like, she starts out in Syria and moves to the USA, and like the difference between the two and the fact that like both had their good and bad parts to them, I really liked that parallel that she highlighted. And the final book that we have to talk about for July is The Other Bennet Sister by Janice Hadlow. The Other Bennet Sister is an adult historical fiction that retells the story of Pride and Prejudice through the eyes of Mary Bennet, the middle Bennet sister. So it was great that I started this while I was still in my Pride and Prejudice phase. I think this is one of the better Pride and Prejudice retellings that I've read because it's part retelling and then part sequel. Like, only the first third is actually retelling Pride and Prejudice. They don't get all the way to the end. I'm confused about some of the timeline stuff because the second half of the book is supposed to happen 2 years later, but some of the stuff that has happened since the last part of the book, I was like, I feel like you needed more than 2 years for this, guys. I still thought it was great. I really enjoyed the fact that we got to delve into Mary Bennet's character and kind of sit in her head and find out what she was thinking and why she was the way she was. I liked the fact there were lots of we're falling down. There were plenty of really good points that were made about the society that Mary would have lived in, about Regency society and what the expectations for women were. I like the way she used a lot of the lesser side characters for Mary's journey. Like, we see some of the main characters that you're really attached to in Pride and Prejudice, but she definitely pulls from more than just the main characters. We don't see as much of them as we do of, like, for example, Mr. and Mrs. Gardner. I loved how Mary went around finding herself. I loved the little romance. That was really cute. I do think at points it went a little too hard on the Pride and Prejudice parallel aspect. There was one specific conversation, like there were lines here and there that I was like, I don't know how I feel about that being an exact quote from the book here in this book. Like, there were places where that was well done. There are places where it was not well done. I was just like, that's a very glaringly, obviously not your book. Although she did, the first chapter was really good, like, of setting it up like it is actually Jane Austen's world. The first chapter felt like Jane Austen. But after that, we kind of eased into the writer's own style. And so then when you had those weird little snippets from the actual Pride and Prejudice book, I was about to say book. There's only one of them, sadly, for all of us. But when you had those snippets, it was kind of jarring because you knew where it was coming from, and you're like, but you didn't write this. You just, like, it felt forced. That's what I'm trying to say. It felt like it had been forced into the narrative instead of being organic. Some places it was organic, and some places it was not. But there was one specific scene that I was just like, this is almost word for word a scene that happens in book 1 in Pride and Prejudice. Why did we choose to do this way? I think we would have been, I liked the scene. I just think the conversation should have been different to an extent. It should have been less word for word this conflict in the original book. Those are all of the books that I read in July. Please let me know down in the comments if you have read any of these books. I would love to talk to you about them. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. Also, since you're already on YouTube, why not check out a couple of my other videos, because I like to talk about books a lot and you might like what I have to say in those videos as well. That is it for now, my friends. Happy reading, and I will see you later when we will talk about more wordy, nerdy things. Bye!